What's up, Flannelverse? We are here. We are ready for Monday Night Football. Immediately laughing at P Mantis comment. Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have filled up on the piss to bring here to drink tonight, but I'll be drinking. I'll stick to the water. We're gonna break down Monday Night Football. We've got the Ravens at the Chargers. Should be a fun game. No guarantees. I think this one, I don't feel quite as good about it as the Bengals game that went completely off. Was that 2 weeks ago at this point? Don't feel as good about it, but I think that it's, that's within the range of outcomes. Is just a full on big scoring game. I'm excited about this one. Should be a lot of fun. Oh, seen some Australians here, people from all around the world. Good to see you all here. This should be a fun one. Mike, no brew tonight. I sticking with water tonight. We're going to go position by position: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. At the end, I'll take a look at FanDuel after I've gone through position by position, just really briefly, and then at the end, I will play around with some lineups on DraftKings. Take any questions that you guys have. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, would appreciate it. Trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the football season. We're getting pretty close. We're just under 3,800, I think, at this point. Let me update that real quick. We were at 3796 or something last time I looked. So would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. Of course, like the video, commenting, all of that is very helpful. Best ways to support me. I mentioned it on the show this morning. If any of you are interested in checking out fantasy point stuff, so like most of the stuff, actually, the one thing that I'm using today that is not fantasy points is this is Roto Grinders Lineup HQ. The Roto Grinders optimizer is on the screen right now. This is the one thing that I think I'm using tonight. That is not fantasy points, but the fantasy points data suite. So here's an example, free right now. If you want to check it out, preview it. A lot of great stuff in the fantasy points data suite. Just go to fantasypoints.com and it's free. They didn't actually tell me what the promo is. I'm guessing that it's free like until the weekend, but I don't actually know how long this is going to run. So check it out if you want to. But for now, we're going to get into it. We're going to go position by position. And I'm going to try to get here. I'm going to try to get out of here by 7 o'clock Central Time. That would be 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Who thinks I can do it? Do you guys think I can get out of here by 8 o'clock Eastern? I think I can do it. I'm going to try. All right, we're going to start at quarterback. We've got Lamar Jackson in the flex, coming in at just under 50% ownership. Actually, I'm just going to click reset here just real quick, make sure this is all up to date. Yep, looks like nothing changed. 50% ownership going to Lamar in the flex. At captain, Lamar coming in at 20% ownership. So about 70% total ownership going to Lamar. I don't have any issue with that. Like Lamar is just awesome. 70% feels like about what I probably want to get to. I don't want to have him in every single lineup. Certainly, like we have enough stars on the slate. There are ways for it to go where Lamar is not in the winning lineup. I might even end up a little bit light on 70% overall, but if I get to 70%, I think I would be totally fine with that. That's a pretty strong number for Lamar. He has just been awesome. 25.1 fantasy points per game so far this year, leading all quarterbacks. He's not that much more expensive than the other studs on this slate. So I like Lamar. Going to get to a lot of Lamar. Chargers defense has allowed the 13th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the 7th most via the run. So it's a nice matchup for Lamar all around. Nice matchup for his skill set. So yeah, I like Lamar quite a bit. As far as how I'm stacking Lamar, you don't need to stack him anywhere. So I'll just say that, like, you can go Lamar unstacked either in the flex or in the captain spot. He is an elite rushing quarterback, one of the rare quarterbacks that I'll play unstacked. I do like the idea, and I brought this up on the morning show, and I have not tested this. I have not looked at the data. I do not have the capabilities of a Cody Main to quickly look through like the database going back years. I suspect that a rushing quarterback like Lamar Jackson at captain with 3 pass catchers is going to go super low owned. I don't think a ton of people are going to play Lamar Jackson at captain with 3 pass catchers. And so I think I like the idea of doing it because you still have the same correlation there as any other quarterback. Like obviously when those receivers are scoring fantasy points, Lamar is to a lesser extent also scoring fantasy points. So I like the idea of playing Lamar at captain with like actually forcing in 2 or 3 pass catchers with him, because I think relative to like non-rushing quarterbacks, I think that it's going to be somewhat unique. So just an idea that I have not tested whether it's actually true. I haven't simmed this out, anything like that. But I think it is something that I am going to be doing. I think that's it on Lamar. On the other side, we have Justin Herbert, who has also been awesome lately. He's been running a little bit more in recent weeks. He's been throwing. The pass rate over expectation has gone up significantly in recent weeks. The fantasy production has also been there as a result for Justin Herbert in recent weeks. 47% projected ownership in the flex for Herbert. At captain coming in at 15. My God, that's higher than I thought it was going to be for Justin Herbert. That's probably a little bit higher than I want to be for Justin Herbert at captain. I don't have any like huge issue with it because it's obviously a great spot for him. I think I'll probably come in underweight on 15% Justin Herbert in the captain spot, just because like Lamar is just a better fantasy producer than Justin Herbert. With that said, here's a note that I have on Justin Herbert. On the season, 15.9 fantasy points per game. That's 18th of all quarterbacks. But in the past 4 weeks, 22.2 fantasy points per game. So that's the 8th best of all quarterbacks. So he has been much better as a fantasy asset over the past 4 weeks than he had been earlier in the year. He's running more. Like I said, he's throwing more. They're just using him a lot more. So he looks pretty good. And also, as obviously an ideal matchup, Ravens defense has allowed the 6th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the 3rd most via the pass, which even though he's running a little bit more, he's still mostly a passing quarterback. So this really does set up well for Justin Herbert also. I suspect I come in underweight to, he's getting 65% ownership. I like him quite a bit, so I don't want to like undersell it, but I suspect I'll be under 65% just by a little bit, despite how good he looks. Now, maybe I'll end up just going underweight on the running games in general. So it's possible I don't end up underweight there. But I suspect I'll be at least a little bit underweight on Justin Herbert. All right, I am going to quickly move on to, I forgot to turn on, I keep on meaning to turn on subscribers only chat so we can get rid of the damn bots. And then I forget every time. So apologies for the bots. Before we move on, we had somebody asking about inactives. Yeah, Roquan Smith is out, which I don't know that it matters that much. Obviously, it hurts or it helps the Chargers a bit having Roquan Smith out. But yeah, that is a good note. Kieran had mentioned check the inactives when you can. Reminder, keep an eye out for the backup nose tackle being out. No, he was not. You had sent me that note on X. He is not out, the backup nose tackle. At least as far as I could tell, the name that you threw at me was not on the inactives list. Who is DJ Chark is inactive for this game. Kamani Vidal, that was kind of expected that he would be. There was some chance that DJ Chark was going to return, but no, he is on the inactives list. So that is the one that is, most significant, at least of the offensive players. Okay. Mateo says underweight on Herbie, your loco Ace. Yeah, to be clear, not like significantly, and I might not end up underweight on Justin Herbert. I really like Justin Herbert. I think he looks great. It's a great matchup. So I don't want to. I'm not like trying to fade Justin Herbert. It's just a matter of you can't play everybody, and we have a lot of strong options. So I think it's possible I end up a little bit. I think I'm more likely to be underweight on Justin Herbert than Lamar Jackson. I think. All right. Let's move on to running backs in order to keep this on schedule, because the quarterbacks are always pretty easy. Oh, and Justin Herbert, I will just add, yes, I always want to stack Justin Herbert, even though he's run a little bit more. I'm always stacking him regardless of where he is in the lineup. When I have him in the captain spot, due to the scoring dynamics on DraftKings, I want to have him multiple stacking partners in the flex with Justin Herbert in the captain spot. All right, moving on to running backs. We'll start with Derrick Henry. Let me see if this is, just refresh this. Let's see if this is working right. I might just skip this part. Okay, Derrick Henry, the highest projected running back here. Getting 11% ownership in the captain spot. That's part of the reason that I'm not super enthusiastic about Herbert in the captain at 15%, is you can get Derrick Henry at lower ownership in the captain spot. I think I'm just more inclined probably to do that. Like I might try to flip this exposure in the captain spot to the two of them. In the flex, Derrick Henry coming in at 37% ownership. So again, that's a number that seems about right. That's probably about what I'm aiming for with Derrick Henry. I think that's a strong number. When I do my write-ups of these slates. I always start with like, here is my group of studs, and I always want to try to get to at least 3 of those studs. And I'll just show you the list of the players that I want to have in 3 of these players in every lineup. And I cut it off at Quentin Johnston for this one. So I want to have at least 3 of Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Derrick Henry, Ladd McConkey, Zay Flowers, J.K. Dobbins, Will Dissly, and Quentin Johnston. That is my list of, I want to have at least 3 of that group in every lineup I make. I don't actually set a rule to do that, but it's because they project so well. I think I kind of always do, regardless of whether I set a rule. Maybe I don't get there in every one, but if I were hand building, I would want to have at least 3 of that group in every lineup that I make. So yeah, Derrick Henry looks great. I don't know what I need to tell you about Derrick Henry. We've been watching football this year, right? We know who Derrick Henry is. My notes on him: he's averaging 20.6 PPR fantasy points per game, 3rd of all running backs. So even in PPR, where he's not, was not really a PPR guy, he's still 3rd of all running backs in PPR points per game. Chargers defense has allowed the 7th most, and actually, I feel like I had this number wrong. So let me pull this up. Yeah, I should have gone back and adjusted that, because I wrote it up as they allowed the 7th most. Oh, I think it's on the ground, maybe. Chargers defense. No, not even that. So I had that number. I counted wrong. Let's see. On the ground, it is 14th best matchup for running backs, which is, maybe it's over the last 5. I don't know what I did here. I think I just here's via the run. Middling matchup. I'm not even going to count out. It's just a very middling matchup for Derrick Henry. Can certainly do well against this Chargers defense. I also, with Derrick Henry, think it matters less than other running backs. He's just, who can tackle Derrick Henry, unless you're talking about like a cake matchup or worst possible matchup. I am not that worried about the matchup for Derrick Henry. So I think he looked great. I'm going to be playing a good amount of Derrick Henry. Jake Swale says King Henry about to go Saquon tonight. You see that he tweeted at Saquon after that game. I saw that on Twitter. So maybe he's thinking, all right, I see you, Saquon, I want to match you. But I think the field has it about right with Derrick Henry. If anything, I'd be more inclined to go overweight at captain. Honestly, I think he's getting about the right ownership in the flex as well. I might come in a little bit underweight in the flex, just because, again, you can't play everybody. But I think the ownership looks about right in the flex for Derrick Henry. Just a great play. He's been great all year. Outside of Derrick Henry, Justice Hill going to get some ownership here. He's 3,200, projects pretty well for 3,200. Let's see, what is the ownership coming in at on Justice Hill? Just 19.5% ownership. I kind of like that number. Like, he's got a great role here. He is not like, here, I'll pull up the game log here to show you what it looks like for Justice Hill. He's not the most consistent. Like, you just look game to game, it's, not that many carries. I mean, I guess it's consistently low, like 1 to 5 carries per game. Usually just a couple games with 1, usually has a couple carries. But then in the targets department, which is what you're really, when you're playing Justice Hill, you want the targets. It really depends on game script for him. So he has, games with 7 targets, 6 targets, 5 targets in the most recent game for Justice Hill. Things look pretty good there. But then a lot of games where it's just 1, 2, 3 targets for Justice Hill. So not really the most consistent option out there. But he's going to get some opportunities in any game they play. If they do get behind, that is better for Justice Hill. And this game is in Los Angeles. Tough opponent. So I think this is probably more likely than usual that we see a little bit more of Justice Hill. So yeah, I think he looks great. One of the better. And one thing that I'll note is we don't have a lot of great value or a lot of great super contrarian plays on the slate. So I think Justice Hill is one of the better, like, sort of value, sort of contrarian plays, like sub 20% projected ownership in the flex for Justice Hill. Actually, I think he's getting a little bit of captain ownership also. 2.5% captain ownership also. So he's fairly contrarian, a little bit over 20% ownership overall. We don't have that many options that are getting less ownership that I like better. There might be a couple, but I think he looks like a pretty strong play. I probably want to be close to the field there. I think I'd be more likely to go overweight than underweight on Justice Hill, but I think the field has it about right there. think he looks like a really strong play. I think Keaton Mitchell hasn't really had a role so far. I'm not going to play any Patrick Ricard. He could have like a random goal line touch, but they have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. I just don't think it's that likely. Doesn't have much of a role in terms of like actually getting fantasy points. And Keaton Mitchell has not, I don't think he's had a carry yet, if I remember correctly from the show this morning. Just not really involved. We know that he is zero carries so far on the year, a total of 1 route run in each of the games he's played, 0 targets. He's the one thing we know about Keaton Mitchell, the one reason to consider playing him is that he is super efficient. Like we've seen him have those massive plays last year. He was electric. He was, kind of like a chain light last year. So I guess you like that about Keaton Mitchell, but can't really do anything if you don't get any touches. And he hasn't gotten any touches in his first 2 games of the year. I don't really see any reason for them to give him touches unless there is an injury or a blowout, in which case, yeah, they probably do give him run in the case of an injury or blowout. So I think he's fine at like virtually 0 ownership. But certainly I think the most likely outcome for Keaton Mitchell is that he's a 0. It's projected for 0.1% flex ownership. He's also 2,000. So even if he does have just a random, like, I don't know, 4-point play, doesn't necessarily pay off at 2,000. So it's a thin play, but I think in a 150 set, if you want to get a few shares of Keaton Mitchell, I have no issue with that. I think he's electric. I think he probably still is. Obviously, we haven't seen it yet this year, but certainly not somebody I'm prioritizing at all. J.K. Dobbins, 10,000, actually projects better than I kind of would expect him to. It's not as good of a matchup for J.K. Dobbins as it is for the passing game. But as a result of, he's projecting for 24.5% flex ownership, also projecting for 4% captain ownership. I'm inclined to be underweight on J.K. Dobbins. That's low enough ownership that I can't say that I'm going to be like way underweight. I was hoping he would come in and people would have a ton, but he's not really coming in with that much ownership, under 30% total ownership for the lead runner for the Chargers. But he doesn't have that great of a role. If you just look at like the game log in recent weeks, so let's just look at the last 2 weeks. We've had Gus Edwards back for the last 2 weeks, and he's looked better. Gus Edwards has. So the role has kind of declined a bit for J.K. Dobbins in the past 2 weeks. Just, I guess 26 total carries is not bad, but just 4 targets. So we're looking at 13 carries and 2 targets per game over the past 2 weeks. And let's look at, I think it was actually Gus had more of a role 2 weeks ago, so I guess that is something to look at. But in week 11 carries for J.K. Dobbins, 1 target. Like that's not a great role for a player who is $10,000 in a game that has a lot of positive matchups. He doesn't have a great matchup or a great role, and he's $10,000. So I'm still inclined, I think, to be underweight to the field at 28%. But that probably means I want to get to 20% total ownership on J.K. Dobbins. Not like a full fade, but it's kind of asking a lot of him. He certainly wouldn't make it into my first 5 hand-built lineups, I don't think. I don't know. He just doesn't have much of a role with Gus Edwards back the past couple weeks. So it's kind of a fade for me, not a full fade, but it isn't the best spot for J.K. Dobbins. And I can read off the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game. It's actually not that bad over the past 5 weeks. That's interesting. Better matchup than I thought it was over the past 5 weeks. It is a top 5 matchup for running backs. That is mostly through the air, as you can see here. And he doesn't do a lot through the air. So from that standpoint, it's a slight negative matchup on the ground. It's interesting. Was it different? Again, it's a very, as you see, it's a very even matchup, just a total 0 in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, the Ravens defense, but it's a negative matchup, negative 2.5 on the ground, positive 2.5 through the air. And he's more involved just on the ground. They don't really have a great pass catching running back. So I don't know, not the best matchup in the world, not the worst. It's a very middling matchup. The role isn't great. I think overall, I probably end up a little bit light on J.K. Dobbins. Now, there is the revenge narrative. As Daniel says, It's true. Like he might they might give him more opportunities because of the revenge narrative. So maybe, the 11 carries, 13 carries the past couple weeks, or 15, I don't know what it was. Maybe that's not going to be the case here. Maybe they do give him more touches because this is a revenge game. But I don't know, 28%. I think I'm going to be a little bit light. Yeah, revenge. I mean, there's a ton of revenge throughout this game, as Anthony points out. It's just, it's a Harbaugh Bowl. It's a lot of revenge, a lot of players that have played on both teams, a lot of fun going on. But J.K. Dobbins, yeah, I think probably 28%, a little bit higher than I want to be on J.K. Dobbins, but not by any massive amount. I think it's just a little bit higher than he should be for his role the past couple weeks with Gus Edwards. And yeah, Gus Edwards also a revenge game for Gus Edwards. And Gus Edwards, so I guess I'll transition here to Gus Edwards. He's just 2,800, doesn't project particularly well, but he's had somewhat of a role the past couple weeks. So as I said, he's been running a little bit more efficiently. Like you just look at his yards per carry the past 2 weeks, it's like 4 to 5 yards per carry, I think, in both games, as opposed to earlier in the year when it was like 3 yards per carry. And the coach speak has been pretty positive on Gus Edwards. Like they're like, it's the best he's looked all year. After he was out for several weeks, he's healthier than he was earlier in the year. And over the past 2 weeks, 16 carries for Gus Edwards, no targets, which is kind of what you expect for Gus Edwards. Hasn't really had any, hasn't had any goal line looks, which is, you kind of, with Gus Edwards, you're going to want those goal line looks. Like he's the type of running back who's tough to get there without the goal line looks. But if you told me Gus Edwards is going to get 8 carries in this game and he's only 2,800, is that right? Let's see. I think that's a strong enough role for a $2,800 running back. Even though he's not the most explosive runner, he's getting 14% ownership. I think that's probably a little bit light. I think I'd probably like to be above weight on 14%, just a little bit, because the role is pretty strong. 8 carries on average over the past 2 games since he's been back. He's been pretty effective with those carries. Not the best matchup in the world, but also a revenge game for Gus Edwards. I don't know. I think it's on a slate that's lacking much great value. I think he's one of the better value plays. I think I'd be more inclined to go overweight to 14% than underweight, but not a massive stand for me. It just seems a little bit light for a player that has had a pretty strong role in recent weeks. And I don't know that the fact that he hasn't had goal line looks, I don't think that means that he can't have goal line looks. He had that role when he was on the Ravens. He got those goal line looks all the time. So I think that he could just get more out of nowhere. I think it's been. I feel like it's random. I could be totally wrong about that. Like maybe the coaches just really do believe in Hassan Haskins and J.K. Dobbins more, but Hassan Haskins has not been great with the goal line role. So I think it's possible that they start giving that to Gus Edwards. And then Hassan Haskins, the other back here for the Chargers. He's only 200. He does have 5, I want to say, inside the 5 carries on the year. He has at least 1 in each of the past 2 games. So they seem to like him for some reason inside the 5-yard line. They give Hassan Haskins those goal line carries. Again, I'm hopeful. I kind of think that that's just a fluky thing and that they don't really think he is their goal line back. He has had 1 touchdown on those goal line looks. Yeah, John says Haskins has been getting the goal line, but that might change with the revenge game. Also true. Like this could be just even if they do consider him the goal line back, it's possible they just let one of the other guys get that role in this game. But I'm not sure that I even believe that he is truly their goal line back. I guess we have some saying like five inside the 5 carries is not nothing there for Hassan Haskins. I think he's a fine option at 200. Again, we saw a player get we saw players in the optimal at 200 with 0 fantasy points last night. He's as likely as maybe any player at 200 tonight to score a fantasy point, and then probably the most likely $200 player to score a touchdown. So I think he's a fine option because he's getting 0 ownership in the largest field GPP. So the tournaments that I play, I think Hassan Haskins 2% ownership, I guess. So not exactly nothing. I think that's about right for Hassan Haskins. That's probably about where I want to be there. All right, I think that is it for. Is that all the running backs? Did we go through? Yeah, we've gone through all of the running backs. Sweet. I'll move on to wide receivers. I'll take a look at questions briefly here. All right. Matt Butler says Haskins played for Harbaugh at Michigan. He recruited him, so he's known him well for the last 8 years. So maybe that's a role, I guess. Maybe that's why he's given him that goal line role. He just really likes Hassan Haskins as a person and wants to get him those touchdowns. But maybe even with that said, maybe he's more likely to go to the revenge guys in this particular game. He hasn't been good in the role. He has 1 touchdown on the season. So I think he's a fine play at 2%, but not a huge priority. All right, let's see. D. Owens thinks Deontay Johnson's going to have something at some point. Oh, yeah, we'll talk about the wide receivers. Certainly possible. Gus or Deontay, pick one. I mean, I guess Deontay is, I think, going to be lower owned, so that's a thought there. All right. Thank you for the reminder. Not fooling around, crew. Yes, please do subscribe if you haven't already done so. Like the video, all of that. Very helpful for me as I'm trying to grow the channel. Oh God, I hate these things. Brandon says Gus Edwards is the MVS of Jamal Williams. It's just my brain can't handle that game. I don't know why. It seems so simple, and I struggle with it. All right. Yes, sneaky play. Keaton Mitchell going to get no ownership, but I don't love the play. I think you can play it in like a 150 set in the largest field GPPs, but he's most likely going to not see the field at all today. So he's fine as a a dart throw in large field tournaments, but most likely not going to do much. All right. Let's move on to wide receivers. Oh, I got to refresh this. Showdown first. Find the game. All right. Ladd McConkey, the top projected receiver on the slate. He is playing today, by the way. That was another one that we were looking out for inactives. We got that news pretty early in the day that he was going to play. He looks pretty good. 37% projected ownership in the flex. In the captain spot, Ladd McConkey coming in at 13% ownership. So total 50% ownership going to Ladd McConkey. Hard to argue with it. This is a best possible matchup. I think literally it is the best possible matchup in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. And I will pull that up here. Schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed for receivers. Yes, the best possible matchup for receivers. Now he does run the slot. So it's a slightly worse matchup for slot receivers, where he's run 71% of his routes so far this year. So relative to his teammates, he doesn't have the nut matchup, but it's still, top 6 in terms of production to slot receivers. And he does line up some outside of the slot also. So great matchup for Ladd McConkey. Pretty good role. I don't want to say great role for Ladd McConkey. We can look at his game log here. He gets targeted I think he saw 9 targets last week, and that was his best. I'm just going to pull up McConkey by himself first. Yeah, 9 targets last week on 76% route participation. So he's not looking like Malik Neighbors, that kind of role where he not Malik Neighbors last week, I guess, but early in the year when Malik Neighbors was being targeted 12 to 14 times per game for a period. It's never been that with Ladd McConkey. It's for most of the year, it's been, as you can see here, 6 or 7 touches most games on the season. Drop down to just 2 in week 10 in a tough matchup with the Titans, and then back up to 9 targets last week. Has yet to hit double-digit targets in a game this season. If we think he's healthy, I think that this is a game where he's pretty, more likely than usual to do so. I think they're going to throw a little bit more than usual. I know some people have concerns that maybe he's not fully healthy here. I'm playing it as though he is. I think 50% is about right for Ladd McConkey. So again, not a spot that I'm trying to take any major stand. I think 13% cap ownership feels about right for Ladd McConkey. So I think it looks good. Okay, yeah. You don't think that he's given him the red zone carries just because it's just he hasn't been very good with those red zone carries is the thing. So it's hard to, I don't understand why he's playing Hassan Haskins. So just looking for some kind of a reason, maybe. All right. If Ladd is limited, who would get the biggest bump? That's a good question. Again, he runs mostly from the slot. We looked at this earlier today. I guess I can pull that up. Who else runs the slot? It was Darius Davis and Jalen Reagor, I believe, were next up for. I don't think this is something that I'm going to factor in much. because I think, the fact that he's active, Darius Davis and Jalen Reagor both 57% of their routes this season from the slot. So I guess they would benefit from Lad McConkey. And that's just also just from a like somebody's going to be out on the field. So I guess neither of them separates as the player who would be most likely to get out there on the field. I don't know. It's neither of them is a big priority for me. I guess we can continue on with the Chargers, look at the on the season, or I guess recent. Let's look at last week for all of these Chargers. Actually, let's do the other better Chargers wide receivers before we get to the real tertiary options. Quentin Johnston has had a great season, not the best role, but like a really strong season. He is 7,400. He has the best matchup of all of the receivers. And again, we pull up the chart here over the past 5 weeks. Somebody pointed this out earlier. Over the past 5 weeks, an especially juicy matchup for the receiver lining up on the left side of the field, which is typically Quentin Johnston. It's been an awesome role. They move around the field a bit, I think. But yeah, I think it's a great spot for Quentin Johnston. His role is not really super elite. Just looking at the season, 36 targets in 8 games. Like that's not that great. A little bit, 4.5 targets per game for Quentin Johnston, 73% route participation. Not the best role out there, but he's scored a ton of fantasy points. I guess we can see his fantasy points per game. Expected 8.5. He's actually scoring 11.8 fantasy points per game. He's had a really, really strong year that nobody was really expecting. He has a really strong matchup. He's not getting, let's see what the ownership looks like. 4% captain ownership for Quentin Johnston. Excuse me. 24.5% flex ownership. I think I would be more inclined to stay about with the field in the flex and be a little bit overweight, I think, at captain for Quentin Johnston, just because we have seen him have those spike weeks from time to time. He is like, I think he's going to be boom bust. If he doesn't have a big player too, he's probably not going to do all that much. But low enough ownership there at 4% at captain that kind of appeals to me. I think that he does have that huge play potential. He has the spike week potential. So I do like Quentin Johnston a bit. I think I end up probably overweight overall to the 28% on Quentin Johnston. But overall, I think I prefer him in the captain spot more so than the flex. All right. Seeing if let me get rid of this. I think that I have the moderators get rid of the bots for me, and it works for you guys. And then it doesn't work in StreamYard. I still see the bots and it throws me off. Swaggy Pete asks, would you take Justice Hill or Gus Edwards straight up? Probably Justice Hill for me. I mean, he definitely projects better. Are you talking about like DFS? Let's see, on the projection side, oh shoot, I forgot. Here, I'll just go over here. In terms of projection, not J.K. Dobbins. Justice Hill projects for 7 fantasy points. Gus Edwards projects for 4 fantasy points. There is a difference in terms of projected ownership, but it's not that big. So I think Justice Hill, just the objectively like better play in terms of projection, and not that much higher ownership. So yeah, Justice Hill, my preference if you're just going to one. Outside of McConkey and QJ, I really like Josh Palmer, and it's really hard to put my finger on like a great reason for it. So I will do my best to explain why I like Josh Palmer. And I've fallen for the Josh Palmer trap multiple times already this year. So be advised that I am a sucker for Josh Palmer, and it has not hit yet this year. But 20% projected ownership in the flex going to Josh Palmer. At captain going 2% projected ownership. I think I probably want to be overweight on both of those numbers for Josh Palmer. So 22 total percent ownership. The role has just been, actually, I shouldn't say the role has been great, but I'm just going to pull up his game log. Must be Josh in here. Yeah. He's running the routes like throughout the year. He's been pretty consistently running. I mean, very consistently running over 50% route participation. The targets have been very weak. But even, last week, 78.6% route participation. It's only gone up from the previous weeks. Now he gets a best possible matchup. So if you look at like the Sims, he doesn't stand out as a great play to the extent that I want him to be. Like I see that ownership, it seems really low to me. He has not really gotten there. But what I do like about Josh Palmer is he is facing a really bad defense, and I think he, run enough routes against a really bad defense. I think it's just more likely that he randomly has a broken play, scores a touchdown, because the defense is just not doing their job. So when I get a great matchup, I just want the players who are out on the field. So I think that this is a case of he's going to be out on the field. He has a great matchup. I think it's more likely than not that he's just going to randomly have a splash play and you're going to want him in your lineup. So I'm going there again. It's not the first time I've fallen for the Josh Palmer trap. You don't have to tail me on it if you don't want to, but I'm going to be going to it a bit today. Or I should say, I'm going to be overweight to Josh Palmer, both the captain and in the flex. I feel like it looks pretty good. Keith says Palmer has a 22-point ceiling today at that price. Exactly. Like I think he does. Like I think that's unlikely that he gets to 22 fantasy points. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that he can have his first breakout game of the season. And then outside of that group, so then we get into the real tertiary kind of throw your hands up type options. You got Jalen Reagor there. You've got Darius Davis there. Both of them are just essentially dart throws. We can look at their game log from last week, past couple weeks. So last week, Jalen Reagor, 10 routes run, 23.8%. Route participation, saw one target. Darius Davis, 3 routes run, 1 target. So they each saw 1 target last week. Jalen Reagor running more routes. Week prior to that, we had Jalen Reagor, 6 routes, 0 targets. Darius Davis, 1 route, 1 target. Like they're trying to get him the ball when he's out there. They designed him, some short plays. He is they're both 200. So no, never mind. Darius Davis is 1,000. Jalen Reagor is 800. Jalen Reagor also getting 8% ownership to Darius Davis's 4. That feels about right. Like I think Jalen Reagor a little bit more likely to have a spike play where he really puts up, points in a limited sample that you actually want it. Yeah, I think that's about right. If anything, I think I actually come in underweight on both, maybe. Like I want to have just sprinkle in a little bit of both, but I'm not super excited to have a ton of either of Jalen Reagor or Darius Davis. I think what we saw last week, because we don't have DJ Chark back, we can probably anticipate that what we've seen in recent weeks is about the role that we can expect for these guys, which is maxing out at 26% route participation for Jalen Reagor. Not a great target earner. 1 target total over the past couple weeks. But if he scores a touchdown with that one, he could, definitely house a 40-yard touchdown. And suddenly you're going to really want Jalen Reagor. So I think, the 8% ownership, probably fine. I don't even know. I might come in a little bit underweight to that, but no real issue with that for Jalen Reagor. And it is a great matchup. So maybe like Josh Palmer, maybe he's a little bit more likely to get, to house a touchdown on his limited looks today than he usually is. He's not out there as much as Josh Palmer. But yeah, I think 8% feels about right for Jalen Reagor. That's probably about where I want to be. Darius Davis, 4%. I don't know. I might come in a little bit underweight to that. Just don't really see the upside for Darius Davis. He's very much the classic backup tight end. If he scores a touchdown, you want him. If he doesn't, you're not going to want him, and he's probably not going to. And he's not a tight end, so he's probably even less likely to score a touchdown. But 4%, probably get a few looks, maybe a few routes at least. Maybe not even looks, but maybe a target. And if he scores a touchdown, you'll want him. All right, on the other side, we've got Baltimore. Zay Flowers, the clear number 1 receiver for the Ravens. Zay Flowers getting some ownership here. That's 29.5% flex ownership for Zay Flowers. He's 9,600, so like the price is not that much lower than the quarterbacks or the running backs. It's more than Lad McConkey. He's getting less ownership than Lad McConkey, though. I don't know. 29.5% feels pretty good to me for Zay Flowers. Again, not a spot that I'm taking any major stand here. 6.5% capped ownership. Also, that feels pretty good. Like I might even come in overweight on 6.5% Zay Flowers at captain. But that feels about right. Like I don't see any major reason to get away from the Zay Flowers ownership. I guess we haven't looked at schedule adjusted for Baltimore. Schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game. Let's see. Where are we? I missed it. Oh, it's the second one. Damn. So over the past 5 weeks, it has been a really good matchup for receivers going up against the Chargers. I did not realize how much better it's been. Best for slot receivers going up against the Chargers over the past 5 weeks. They are the best team for slot receivers to face. And we can take a look at who is running the most slot routes, to what extent for the Ravens. On the season. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers at 38%. Nelson Aguilar, that's interesting. Nelson Aguilar 51%. So maybe that's a little bit of a cookie for Nelson Aguilar. Rashad Bateman just down at 8.6%. He's not really benefiting from the slot matchup at all. Deontay Johnson, maybe if I split this out for just the past couple games, we'd see how he's being used. I guess I'll do that. Over the past couple weeks, it is Mark Andrews leading the way. So maybe it's a sneaky good matchup for Mark Andrews. Definitely for Nelson Aguilar. Also, Tylan Wallace, I guess 44% from the slot. Zay Flowers, just the one that doesn't benefit from the slot matchup is Rashad Bateman, unfortunately. But yeah, or Deontay Johnson actually. But yeah, it looks like a pretty good matchup for Mark Andrews in particular. If you consider him a slot receiver, which 58.8% from the slot over the past couple of weeks, kind of enticing. Nelson Aguilar 45.2%. That's interesting, I guess, that they have been so weak against the slot in recent weeks. I don't know if that's like it's obviously any 5-week sample is a fairly small sample, but they are, kind of an outlier there, worst in the league against it. So worth noting. Ultimately, Zay Flowers, I think the ownership looks about right for Zay Flowers, like 36% total ownership. Go in there, 6.5% at captain is about right for Zay Flowers. Beyond Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, he's been really good this year. He's 5,400. Doesn't project extremely well at 5,400, but we know that he has big play potential where he can pay it off in a hurry. In the flex, Rashad Bateman coming in at, I believe, sub 20% last I looked. Yeah, 15.6%. So this does, looks like a spot that I want to be overweight to Rashad Bateman, even though he doesn't benefit from the slot matchup. It's still a nice matchup for Rashad Bateman. I think he looks really strong. I want to be overweight to 16% Rashad Bateman. I think I'm going to be overweight to Rashad Bateman in the captain spot too, where he's getting very, very little ownership. In the captain spot, Bateman coming in at 1.4% ownership. I'm going to force my way to, at least like 4% Rashad Bateman captain ownership because we know he has such big splash play potential. And, we've seen, I think he has a couple, I think he has at least one, maybe I'm wrong, multi-touchdown game this year. I might be wrong about that. Anyway, looks really good at under 20% total ownership. He's only 5,400. He's a wide receiver 2 on this team. I think he looks great. So yeah, I think I'll be overweight to Rashad Bateman. Beyond those two, it gets a little bit hairier with Nelson Aguilar, Deontay Johnson, Tylan Wallace, I guess. Nelson Aguilar, as we just saw, running, around 50% of his routes from the slot over the past couple of weeks, just a little bit lower, 45% from the slot. And we did see it as a great matchup for slot receivers. I think I'm never excited about playing Nelson Aguilar. He is somebody that I just have trouble getting myself to play. You look at his, he was on a Showdown slate a couple weeks ago, and I said, I don't really want to get to Nelson Aguilar because he just doesn't ever really get it done. And he scored a touchdown like immediately in that game, and then was still not in the optimal lineup. Like still ended up not scoring that many fantasy points. That's kind of what you get from Nelson Aguilar. Like the upside has never really been there. I think I was looking at I think he scored 12.6 fantasy points, if I'm remembering correctly, in that last game, PPR fantasy points, and it was like the most he scored since week 2 of last year, and he played all of last year. So again, small sample size, that's not that many games, but he does not spike a big upside all that often. Now they have added Deontay Johnson to the mix, so maybe he has, lesser odds of putting up a spike week. So it really comes down to what is the ownership for Nelson Aguilar. And I don't think he's going to get a ton of ownership. Let's see here. Yeah, sub 10% at 2,400 on a slate where we don't have any great value. I mean, he's just 2% more ownership than Jalen Reagor. No, again, he's more expensive, but I like it. I think that looks pretty good. I think I'll be overweight to 10% Nelson Aguilar. Again, not somebody that I feel super strongly about, that I want to get to 25%, but I probably want to get to 15% Nelson Aguilar on the slate. I think feels about right, because it is a strong matchup. He does run a significant number of routes, as you see here over the past couple weeks. 44% route participation, just 3 targets in those games. But he does actually. I'm going to pull up the full season. I want to see how many end zone targets he's had on the season, because I feel like I've seen a couple. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just remembering at least one. I guess just two end zone targets on the year in 11 games. So not the best end zone role. Yeah, I think he's a strong play at 10%. I think I'll be a little bit overweight to that just based on the matchup and pretty decent role, but not somebody I feel extremely good about, extremely confident about. Then you have Deontay Johnson. Hasn't really had much of a role, and I just went away from the Deontay Johnson games. That's not what I want. Over the past couple weeks since he has joined the team, not playing much. So since he's joined the Ravens, just 11.3% route participation, 8 total routes in his 2 games with the Ravens. Does have 4 targets in those games, so seen some looks while he's out there. It is possible that now he's establishing himself with the team over time. Maybe he does establish more of a role than we've seen so far. But there's been nothing from the coaches to suggest that like they want him to be one of their top receivers. I kind of thought that they would at some point give him a better role. When he was traded there, I thought like, oh, it's a fine matchup for Deontay Johnson. He's going to step in, be one of those 3 in the rotation. Aguilar's going to go away. There's been nothing like from the coach speak. It's all been like, yeah, he's a great depth piece for us. Like they don't seem to think that Deontay Johnson is one of their 3 best receivers necessarily. So I don't think I'm super excited about playing Deontay Johnson, but if you want to think like it's possible that he does take on a bigger role here, I suspect that he actually goes over owned due to the name recognition. Like I think a lot of people hand building, not really paying attention to trends, are going to assume that he just hasn't really gotten in the groove of things yet, and he's going to get there eventually. 12.5% ownership. My guess is that it's more likely to go higher than that than under, but not something I try that often to project ownership. It can be really hard, and especially in these spots where it's like I'm saying, like based on narratives, I think it's likely to go higher because people know the name. I don't know how many people are actually hand building without projections at this point, so could be totally wrong about that. 12.5% I think is probably too high for a $3,000 receiver with his role. But again, 4 targets over the past couple games. I don't hate 12.5%. I think I'm probably shooting for like 10% Deontay Johnson. And there is an upside case there where maybe he does get a little bit more involved here in this game. So I think it's a fine play, not like a full fade, but more likely to be underweight to 12.5% than overweight to it. And then Tylan Wallace just does not have. I know he had that great game a few weeks ago, but over the past, and I think that includes this game. So I think he had 3 targets in that one game on like 5 routes run. Actually, I can look at the game log here. Yeah, this is the game. He had 3 targets in that game on 5 routes run and put up a million fantasy points. I think he had 115 yards on 3 carries and a touchdown. Just went completely off in that game against Cincinnati. But he has never run more than, he's capped out at 6 routes run in a game this season. Outside of that game where he had 3 targets, he has capped out at 2 targets in a game. Most games he's getting 0 targets. he's one that I also suspect is going to get more ownership than the 2% he's projected for, just because of that one game. And he's also 1,600. Now, the one thing that we did see in that game is capable of a huge splash play where just takes one play to pay it off. I don't know, but I'm not. I don't think it's very likely. I think he's more likely going to come in overweight to this rather than underweight to it. Man, the bots are bad today. Mike, I have not gone over FanDuel yet. About to go over tight ends, and then I'll go over tight ends, defense kickers. Then I'll go over FanDuel. So yeah, I think if he's going to get zero ownership, and again he's projected for 2%. That's fine, I guess. 2% is probably about right. I won't want to have any more than that. I think he's a pretty thin bet, but I guess we've seen that it's at least possible there. Not a great roll. 2% probably about right for Tylan Wallace. So really only in the largest field GPPs, I guess, is what I'm saying. All right, let's move on to tight ends. All right, that worked. Good. Will Dissly, the highest projected tight end on the slate, has had an awesome role in recent weeks. I think I'm just going to read off. Well, let's take a look at ownership, and I'll just read off the numbers. I think since their bye, he's had a pretty awesome role. 28% ownership going to Will Dissly at 6,400. Also getting 5% projected ownership in the captain spot. And, I see those numbers and I see the price tag, and it, like, my immediate instinct is that seems too high to me. But I don't know. I don't really think that is has been the case. Just based on his recent role. Yeah, subscriber chat is not on, and I don't know how to turn it on. Maybe that's something I need to figure out, is how to turn on subscriber chat once I've already started a stream. I don't know if it's possible. So for this stream, I think it's just I'm just gonna have to deal with it. Oh, well, I have to move down hang on one second. My notes on Will Dissly since their bye week: 37 targets. So this is in 6 games since the bye week. 37 targets. So just over 6 targets per game on 60.3% route participation. The Ravens have also allowed the most fantasy points per game in the league to tight ends who line up in line, which is where Dissly has lined up 54.5% of the time since the bye. So he's lining up in line. The Ravens defense is giving up a ton of fantasy points, the most in the league, to tight ends who line up in line that's on the season. They're giving up the most to, which is not a huge number, just 2.7 over expectation. So don't read too much into the matchup, but it has been a slightly positive matchup here for tight ends lining up in line. And then of course he also doesn't run all of them in line. So if you want to look at the total, it's more of a middling matchup. Slightly positive, but not amazing. But overall, the role has been very good. It's a slightly positive matchup for Will Dissly. The ownership number and the price tag shocks me at initially looking at it, but I think it's probably about right overall. 5% captain ownership in the flex going to 28%. Like that's actually probably about where it should be, given that he's been targeted 6 times per game since the bye week. I know that Keith says Dissly. That's my initial thought was seems overpriced, but he's been really good. I think the Sims would tell you that he is. I think Adam said that he was actually getting more than what we have here. Kind of goes against my instincts. My instinct is like that seems over too much ownership, but that's not what Adam was seeing in the Sims. And you look at the role; it's a pretty strong role relative to most of the receivers here. So I think he looks okay. And then we also have so Hayden Hurst is out. So we need to at least consider the other tight ends here, Stone Smart and Tucker Fisk. Neither of them projected for much. They're just 200. I'm not really enthusiastic about either of them. Stone Smart projected for 5% ownership. Actually, you can see here, they're basically, they have the same projection, the same price, the same ownership projection. Very close. I'm not super excited about either of them. I think I'd be slightly more inclined to go to Stone Smart, but let's take a look at recent weeks, the game log for the Chargers. Last week, 5 routes run for Tucker Fisk, 4 for Stone Smart, 0 target. 2 targets for Tucker Fisk last week, 0 for Stone Smart. In week 10, 1 route run for Tucker Fisk, 0 targets. Did Stone Smart play? I'm not seeing Stone Smart in week 10. Looks like he didn't play. Yeah, I think that's right. I think he returned in week 11. I don't know. Neither of them is going to run more than I wouldn't expect either of them to run more than a handful of routes. We thought maybe if Lad McConkey was out, maybe they would run more 2 tight end sets, but I think Lad McConkey is probably not that limited. I guess if you do think Lad McConkey is going to be fairly limited, then maybe you want to consider these backup tight ends. But man, not a great role. 4 and 5 routes, 2 targets last week for Tucker Fisk, so that's not nothing. And he is a stone min. 5% probably about right for each of them. Not really. Neither of them is a priority for me. I think in a 150 set, mix them in. Probably neither of them would make my, like if I were doing a 20 set, I doubt I get to either Stone Smart or Tucker Fisk. But more like in a 150 set, I probably mix in almost like probably underweight to 5% on both of them. Not excited about either of them, but they'll be out there for a handful. Classic backup tight end. If they score a touchdown, you want them. If they don't, you probably don't want them. On the other side, we have the mess that is the Ravens tight ends, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, who seem to have basically identical roles. Now, we did note, looks like a better matchup for Mark Andrews. So I guess he projects a little bit better. He's slightly more expensive. As we pointed out, he's running like over 50% from the slot, and it is a great matchup for slot receivers. So I guess I would break the tie toward Mark Andrews based on how much he runs from the slot. But we can take a look at the ownership here. Mark Andrews, 22% projected ownership. Isaiah Likely also 22, another similar one. They're projected for, like, they have about the same price tag, about the same projection, about the same ownership projection. I think my preference is, just using that slot route participation as a tiebreaker. I would break the tie toward Mark Andrews. As Derrick Brown pointed out to me today, no tight end has scored a touchdown yet this season on the Chargers. So not a great matchup for tight ends in general. I think Mark Andrews could be sort of an outlier. Here, I'll just pull up the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed on the season. It is the 4th worst matchup for tight ends against the Chargers defense. But based on the slot participation for Mark Andrews, I think I'm okay with it. I think I kind of like Mark Andrews. I think that I would break the tie, maybe get a little bit overweight to Mark Andrews at the expense of Isaiah Likely is sort of how I am probably going to handle it. But neither of them is a huge priority. I probably get to 25% Mark Andrews, 20% Isaiah Likely, and call it a day. We've seen Isaiah Likely has the ability to have those just massive spike weeks. It's not the best matchup for it, though. So I'm not really enthusiastic about either of them. And Charlie Kolar has not really done much all year. I thought that he had at least one spike week earlier in the year, and Adam pointed out that he really hasn't had anything that has stood out in terms of like route participation or target share. Maxes out at 28% in week 10. It doesn't have any other week with higher than 28% route participation. I think Isaiah Likely was also out for that game. Maxes out. He had 1 week with this is the week that stood out to me, was the 4 target week, but really hasn't done much all year. So another classic backup tight end. You can play him at low ownership just for the what if he scores a touchdown. Sub 3% projected ownership. I guess that's kind of nice. Like, I think I prefer that probably over the Chargers tight ends. I don't know if I mean that. It's about the same. I don't love it. They're all just backup tight ends. Throw them in there if you want them. But, he's getting the lowest ownership of the group. I'm not enthusiastic about any of these true backup tight ends. Obviously, that doesn't include Isaiah Likely. All right. And then defenses and kickers, I think, are kind of interesting. Just looking at the projected ownership in the flex, I'm probably not playing them in the captain spot, but Ravens defense coming in at 14% ownership in the flex, Chargers at 13%. I think the Chargers have the better defense and they're cheaper and it's a home game. So I do think that I'm going to force in I'll probably force in 20% Chargers defense. I think that this is too low of an ownership number for a too cheap Chargers defense that is actually pretty good. So I think the Chargers defense is the one that I am going to take a little bit of a stand on, try to get above weight to it. Ravens defense, 14% feels just fine to me. Dicker, the kicker, 16%. Justin Tucker, 15%. I think I'd be more inclined to get, I think I probably come in a little bit higher than 15% on both of these kickers, but not with much enthusiasm. More like kickers are typically a little bit under owned. This should be a high scoring game. They should benefit from a high scoring game. We don't have that many great value options. So I think I just kind of throw my hands up and say, yeah, I'll probably come in slightly overweight on the kickers, but not by any massive amount. I think that does it for the slate breakdown. I'm going to go to FanDuel and I will look for any questions after I just do a very brief rundown of the FanDuel slate. At MVP on FanDuel, Lamar Jackson coming in at 32% ownership. No issue with that number. Justin Herbert, 20%. Neither of them is like I think the ownership is fine on them. Probably not. I don't know. Actually, I think I did make a hand-built lineup, and I think I did have Lamar Jackson at MVP, again, doing the overstacking Lamar thing. Lad McConkey looks like a pretty fun MVP option on FanDuel at 7%. Zay Flowers at 5% stands out as a really nice option there. Actually, J.K. Dobbins on FanDuel, like as much as I'm not enthusiastic about playing J.K. Dobbins, I think 5.5%, probably too low there. So I kind of like that. QJ stands out to me. Sub 3% ownership going to Quentin Johnston. Just he does have that big splash play upside. So I think he could be the highest scoring player on the slate. So that looks pretty good. And then Rashad Bateman, 0.6% ownership going to Rashad Bateman at MVP. He's shown us the upside. I think that he is the most contrarian MVP that I would consider on FanDuel. Kind of hard to click him in if you're hand building, go to Rashad Bateman at MVP. But if you're playing, several lineups, MME, and I would certainly want to be overweight to 0.6% Rashad Bateman. And then in the flex, just look for more contrarian options. Again, Lad McConkey looks a little bit under owned there. QJ at just 19.5% looks pretty good to me. I think I'd want to be overweight that. Josh Palmer again looks good at 14%. Bateman just 11% at 8,000. Like that really stands out to me as he's getting too little ownership, both the captain, but also even more so in the flex here. Like that's just too low ownership for a really cheap Rashad Bateman on FanDuel. Yeah, and I think that's probably Aguilar 7% seems fine, but Bateman at 11% just is better, I think. Chargers defense again, 13% looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that's it for the players that look good to me on FanDuel. I'm going to flip this back to DraftKings so I don't start doing stuff in here later and then realize I'm in the wrong spot. All right, I'm going to check in on questions and then I'm going to go make a lineup real quick. Thank you for the heads up, Dan. Yeah, 20 minutes. So I'll get out of here in 2 minutes and I will be ahead of schedule. I'm going to get out of here at 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 o'clock Eastern. All right. Oh, Pepper Tony is a Ravens fan. His scientific prediction is Justice Hill and Isaiah Likely game. Shoot, I'm not planning on getting too much Isaiah Likely, so that would hurt me if that's the case. All right, let's see. Just scrolling up a bit. All right, there's so many spam bots. If you have any questions, yeah, Alan, no issue playing Henry and Hill in the same lineup on DraftKings. Both of them, they have kind of different roles, and they are both better in different game scripts, but I think they can still get there. Just with we could have a 2-minute drill where Hill puts up 6 fantasy points in 2 minutes in the first half, and game script doesn't end up mattering that much. All right, let's see. Somebody said Disley scored. No, I'm saying, I think there was some confusion there. Maybe I said it wrong, but I was saying against the Chargers, no tight end has scored a touchdown. Of course, I didn't even verify this, but that's I trust Derrick Brown. He said no tight end has scored a touchdown against the Chargers so far this year. All right, let's see here. Yeah, Chargers onslaught versus the Ravens, definitely viable. I think onslaughts in general, and this is just, I saw the ETR data early was 10% total lineups will be 5-1. So that's both teams having 5-1 onslaughts. Going to go super low owned. So definitely viable if you want to go Chargers onslaught, even if you want to go to 5-1. I think that makes some sense. Oh, hell yeah, Harpy. Glad you are benefiting from the flash draft stuff. Yeah, by the way, if any of you are not in the Flannelverse Discord, would yeah, come join us. We're hanging out in there. I did a write-up for flash drafts. I haven't written one yet for playoff best ball, but I think I'll probably do that at some point in the Discord. So, and it's free, and the link is in the description of this video if you're interested. Ownership on Gus on FanDuel. I'm not going to go back there. This one, I think it was like, I think it was single digit. So you could go to Gus on FanDuel. It was like 8%, something like that. Pretty low ownership on Gus on FanDuel. Oh shoot, I did not pull up a. Is everything? Let me see. Let me see if I can enter one. Otherwise, I'll have to go to one I've already gone into. All right, 14 minutes. I'm gonna do a team real quick, and we'll call it a day. Get to making my lineups. All right, who is my favorite captain? I mean, I've talked about liking doing some Lamar onslaughts. Let me try that. Lamar in the captain spot. I think this probably goes a little bit under owned. Lamar onslaught with, let's see if I can do Zay and Bateman and Andrews. Now we have 69.50 left per player. Could I fit somebody with McConkey? Let's see. I could include, I mean, Justice Hill. That would be a mega onslaught for the Ravens passing attack. I do need somebody from the Chargers. I could go Justice Hill and then Lad McConkey, I think. Could also go just Justin Tucker. I don't know if I like that in onslaught. I like Josh Palmer. Now I have 8,700 left. Yeah, I could do with QJ. So now leaves 1,300 on the table. You've got the onslaught of Lamar Jackson with 3 pass catchers, and then Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer on the bringback. Leaves 1,300 on the table. I think this makes some sense for a large field GPP. Let me try one more, a different kind of construction here. I think I'm still inclined to pay up a little bit. Maybe a Derrick Henry in the captain spot lineup. Then go to like Derrick Henry with Justice Hill. We talked about this. I think that is viable. Maybe Chargers defense is a little bit, this is kind of contrarian just from a combinatorial ownership perspective. Now we have 9,000 left per player. I like Lad McConkey quite a bit. Will Dissly and Lamar. We'll go Herbert. Now we've got 1,200 left. Got Herbert stacked up with Dissly and McConkey and the Chargers defense. Then you have both of the Ravens running backs. It's a little bit weird. Like there's nothing about this that looks like awesome from a narrative perspective, other than, maybe in the second half we have the Chargers trying to catch up because the Ravens have scored, early and often with Derrick Henry, and then the Ravens continue to run as the Chargers are trying to pass a lot in the second half. So I think this makes some sense. I guess $1,200 left on the table for a large field GPP looks pretty good. I use Lineup HQ, the Roto Grinders optimizer that I showed earlier is how I load so many at once. I haven't done any kind of breakdown on how to do it, but just like any other optimizer, you can download and upload from DraftKings. All right, that is going to do it. You think Deontay breaks the slate? Maybe. That could be fun if he does. That's going to do it for this video. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel. Again, trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. I think I'll be doing a breakdown on Wednesday of the Thanksgiving slate, maybe with a friend. We talked about it before. I need to double check if he's in to do it. I'm pretty sure that I'll do something for the Thanksgiving slate. So that'll be the next thing that I do, not with Adam for that one. But then I'll be back next Monday with Adam. Yeah, I'll be doing all the regular Showdown stuff as well. Thanks, guys. This has been fun. Thank you for hanging out. Like, subscribe, notification bell if you want to get notifications when I go live. And let's make sure we win some money tonight. Good luck.